So at the end of my last video, did you notice this one unidentified E36? Not this one, that was the last video. If you don't know this one, you're way behind on my channel. But this one, it's a 1995 325i. It's an automatic, obviously a sedan that I bought during the winter, as you can see. Take a little closer look here. Obviously under the hood, we got to replace some hood shocks first. That's always the case. A little dirty, some covers missing. This car had a lot of signs of good past ownership, but maybe not in the past few years. Just under 200,000 miles, so it's got a lot of life behind it. It's some E46 wheels, some trim pieces missing. The ignition cylinder is jammed, so although the key still needs to be there for security, you start it with a screwdriver. Some cracks in the paint from a bad repaint, some Drift Kid eBay taillights. All four windows, of course, didn't work, so they all needed new regulators. Battery, of course, totally dead. And of course, under the battery, of course, there's a little bit of rust and a couple minor holes. Remember, I came from South Dakota, so this is minor to me. Here's what the battery tie down should look like. And where you find rust, you find water, and where you find water in E36 trunks is where you find poor sealing taillights. Of course, these eBay ones, no surprise. So with getting a little bit of the rust cleaned up and eventually sealed over with poor 15. I also found some taillights in a junkyard, got everything cleaned up and put them in, which is fantastic. They look great, but the problem was they still leaked because these taillights were still old, as you can see. So what do you do when you have a black car? Well, you use some black seam sealer and you get the job done and you stop water from coming in the trunk anymore. Problem solved. Of course, also the trunk had some fraying wires, fixed those up, wrapped them up, and got a battery.
It's time to hustle. Whether it's a battery, 70 miles away by train, or my dog in my backyard. We're hustling, buddy.
First things first, with the new battery, you got to put your vent tube and plug the other side. Get the hose run down through the battery vent tube rubber grommet thing in the trunk, and then you're vented. Go ahead and put that on your to-do list, eh? So we're looking good with the spare tire cleaned up with this schmutz. Everything back together looking great. Moving up to the engine bay, we got the covers back on, and cleaning will be next with the cooling system, of course. Moving on to the interior, no way I was driving this car without doing this. The nasty was nasty. Hey, that bumper trim piece is in there. So you got French fries, coins, a bunch of other gross stuff. At least I made a few bucks. From here, we're just sucking, soaking, and scrubbing. And this definitely took a few different rounds of both the vacuum, the soaking, and the scrubbing. Stuff was pretty darn nasty. Did I mention that it was still winter? So on the passenger side, there's something that almost looked like turmeric. Just a crazy stain that didn't end up coming out. But after everything else, we had a little bit of fur developed on the carpet from all the scrubbing work. No problem shaving it off with a little bit of a knife. And after everything from left to right, you see that we are just about without stains. Again, the one on the passenger side stayed, but floor mats will cover that. So with the seats out, it's time to clean that, fix the seat belts as well. So see on the leather here, a little before and after, you kind of take a look inside the grains, you can see all the dirt that stays embedded in there, and then the after, nice clean one color, that's great. After getting it all cleaned up, there was still the hole in the driver's side. Luckily enough, found a clean passenger seat in the junkyard to swap those out, as well as a headlight, trunk carpet that I wouldn't have to clean, and the seat adjustment switch since that was broken on the current one. So with the seat back pulled off, all you gotta do is pull the leather off of all these tabs. The top slides off easily, the bottom you have to break these 4 plastic retaining clips. Fortunately, I already had an extra set of these lying around. So with those out, you can push the bottom back on, but first, of course, had to swap out the broken switch on the side. And once this was back and fully assembled, suddenly I had a fresh, clean, fully functioning seat, aside from, of course, these cracks in the base, which we all have, and that's why your seat creaks. And after I've already got ahead of myself, of course, I had to re-clean these new seat pads, the bases, and the rear seat as well, and toasted up the seat belt so it looked brand new. So when I bought it on the drive home, the coolant temp gauge never got fully to temperature. You figure a thermostat, taking a look inside of there, you're not seeing some very good stuff, and of course draining it too, very mucky. With the thermostat housing pulled off, again, kind of even worse. And then on one side, it looked like Will Turner's dad in the second Pirates of the Caribbean movie, which as I'm told is usually a sign of stop leak having been used in the cooling system. So from here, I pulled the thermostat out, put the housing back on, time to run some cleaner through it. Prestone sucks, don't use it. Did an oil change as well using all the random oil I had around. Found out that royal purple oil is actually purple. Did numerous flushes on the cooling system, of course draining from both ends, the radiator and the block. Was not finding much improvement. Eventually found a leak as well, which wasn't surprising. These aren't piss jugs. Tested the pressure on the system aside from losing it without the thermostat and seal at the thermostat housing. Also found that I was leaking at the radiator. Had to replace that. Immediately broke the petcock. Put it in anyway with the old radiator's petcock. Of course broke off a bolt in the head from the thermostat cover. cover, got it out, all good. Then it was time to run some real deal cleaner through the cooling system to get rid of this rust. Probably should have waited to put the new radiator in. Anyway, gave it about 50 minutes of runtime through the neighborhood, was holding temp well, decided, hey, why not do emissions, and passed. Finally drained that. You can see all the rust and old metal had piled up on there. Finally, we were also seeing liquid drain that wasn't orange. Decided to neutralize it with some baking soda, get this cleaned out as quick as possible so it wouldn't rust again. As you can see here, huge improvement on the inside of that. Numerous drains through the block and the radiator. Once it was all fully flushed out, finally I could put some coolant in and the thermostat back in with a new cover.
I don't care if it's plastic.
I then bled the cooling system for a final time in the appropriate way with the ignition on but not the engine on, fan on the lowest speed but with the heat fully cranked so the heater matrix would open and get all the air out that way. And with that job fully done, everything is functioning as it should. You can see how long this eventually took with all of the cleaning and driving, everything looking fresh as it should, brand new everything, and a final bleed with the curb in my backyard helping that out as it always does. And two final bits of de-drift kitting this car, put a stock muffler back on, and E36 Pro Tip at the junkyards. The newer Volkswagen all-weather floor mats fit the rears near perfectly. The fronts I got from my M3. Still need to replace those. Now I am pro tint, but one thing I'm not is pro shitty tint. It is helpful for your skin and interior unless it's old and sucks, and I also don't like reflective tint very much. So that all had to go, and I wasn't going to spend money on new tint, so the easy thing I can do is just remove that. So heating it up, pulling it off to hopefully get as much adhesive to stay with the old film, but of course not all of it would, so with a little soapy water and blades, we got that off. It was time to get to these window regulators. So in this shot here, 3 or 4 rivets had already been drilled out, and once that was removed, you'll see here I actually drilled the hole out a little bit further to fit some M6 riv nuts. Here I am installing those riv nuts, of course after the bare metal was also painted with touch-up paint. With these 4 riv nut receiving ends installed, I could then put in the replacement regulators. The 2 front windows also had bad seals, so I had to replace those with some used ones. Cleaned the window tracks out, got brand new plastic installed and everything greased up, and the final product was functioning front window regulators, which is rad to see. Suddenly I could use these windows. With the rear regulators, I actually found that they didn't look bent up or anything too bad. The motors also sounded fine, so I did obviously find that the plastic bits that go in the window tracks were totally broken with the old dried up grease. So I cleaned everything out, replaced the plastic, and then those ended up actually working absolutely fine, so I didn't have to drill those out. Putting the door cards back on, of course, replaced 90% of the plastic clips, and it was time to clean these. You can see a little before and after in the grains of the leather and plastic here. Moving on, E36s don't really need wood trim. It's not like they're E38s or something, so usually it's cracked as well anyway. That's actually the point, so replace that with some duplicolor painted trim that used to be gray. And the real icing on the interior cake was installing an original radio. This one actually came from my M3, so don't steal it and use that code. I'm leaving it there for reference. And of course, had to burn some tapes. Shout out to Mo for letting me use this tape recorder to make some mixtapes. And we were just talking glass, so we'll talk some more glass here. There was just a lot of hard water on the exterior, so we got it all cleaned up and then used Turtle Wax's One and Done compound, which works well for knocking down any high spots or foreign matter on top of things like paint or glass. So with this hard water removed, this made a huge difference looking in and out of the car for general clarity and just overall presentation. Clarity and presentation works well for the rest of this car. So first up, of course, is headlights. The driver's side one has the melted back end. We use the one that we got from the junkyard, get that all sanded and polished up on both sides. What I ended up doing here is using one of Turtle Wax's kits to seal the headlights, but I also ended up putting some paint protection film on top since it's self-healing and very glossy as is. Moving on to the rest of the front end, you can see all this other nastiness. The fog lights actually have some really OG paint protection film, the kind that you used to see on white Toyota Tundras that was totally baked on and turning brown. So we got that off, and luckily they were in perfect condition underneath, which is a very rare find on E36s. We got paint protection film put back on those as well. So getting rid of a little bit of overspray on the bumper here and polishing that up ahead of masking everything off and recoating this rock chip guard. I don't remember if this is originally what came on it, but regardless, look how much better it looks. Also coated the grill because someone had previously painted that. Normally that plastic isn't painted, but it already was, and I wasn't going to deal with trying to strip it, so we just painted back over it. So obviously we're starting to shape up here, looking real nice. Fog lights going back in. Next up was using some of that OG Turtle Wax trim restorer on the bumper trim, but what was going to benefit the most from that were these pasty gray kidney grills. So first I used some ice spray waxes to clean those up. Sometimes that's enough, but in this case it needed the full guns. Ended up using that trim restore a little bit more, and the before and after is probably the most ridiculous before and after on this whole car. So we're feeling good, but if you tilt your head up, you can't really ignore what's right above all this stuff, and that is the paint. Thought he was gonna say Roundel. So there is already some oxidation and clear coat failure from whatever this repaint was, but we're still going to be able to polish this turd. So doing a little clay bar, you can see the nastiness that comes out. You can see the clear coat here too. There are some fish eyes and weird things throughout. A little bit of wet sand always helps as long as you have some clear coat left. Obviously we didn't care because we had some failing clear coat. A little bit of polish, you get the before and after, and it is significant. So we have our front end complete, looking real good. Good motivation to continue with the rest of the paint. Now I'm going to be transparent and honest here. This paint was not in good condition with the repaint, aside from the fish eyes and the cracks that I've already pointed out. So here's the thing, guys, let's be honest. I was not looking for a perfect polish on this car. I told myself I was not going to set up lights even in the sun out here. I've done cars outside. I was not going to try to do some 2 or 3 stage polish. I consciously made a decision to not care how perfect this came out, because regardless, as you can see in before and afters, it's going to be a significant transformation. This is not a 100% car. This is not even an 80% car. This is a polish this turd car, and we're doing just that. And at that point, it's also something you don't have to explain to people. So I guess I just wanted to get away from describing literally everything you're seeing on screen. So the bumper was next. Had to sand that down, give it a fresh coat of paint match paint, give it some 1K clear coat. Of course, doing it in the best place possible in my dirty backyard. You can see all the dirt in the paint. Polished the piece of metal between the trunk and the bumper. After that, got her wet sanded down, polished up. It was time to go back on the car. Suddenly, the rear end was matching the standard set forth, but the front end of the car, it was now glossy, polished up, and matching the rest, as you can see with some before and afters here. I know I haven't mentioned the white wheels yet, but for the rest of the car, it was time to get that polished. Again, I promised myself I wouldn't set up lights. I would save myself the time and effort and brain power to just get this stuff polished. Here's some simple before and afters to prove that this thing was headed in the correct direction. You'll see on the final one here, yes, we have some swirls in this black paint, but man, this thing is looking much, much better. So aside from seeing here that I end up moving on to finish the rest of the rock guard on the rear bumper, which I think I had already done, and on the side skirts, yes, on these 15-inch wheels, I had them powder coated white for a different project, still had them laying around. Got some snow tires from my buddy Ian, who really hopes he can get an E36 someday. Maybe we will, or did I say we? Maybe he will. So the general make of the car, all polished and looking good. It was time to start enjoying this car, and this car served me super well for a handful of months for the rest of the winter, with snow tires, polished paint, clean interior, taking me and Boone to the park for games of fetch. And that was that. This car was quote unquote complete, polished up, looking good. Did I mention I got some E36 sedan and X5 specific roof racks for this car? And to mention the coolest state issued license plate that is period correct for this car, 036 Life. On from that, just taking a look. Why don't I shut up? I don't have to talk for this part. Yo, what up? I'm back. So I didn't fix all the flaws in this. Obviously the paint wasn't perfect. I didn't even fix the ignition issue, but I wasn't that worried about it because you still needed the key to get EWS to allow you to start the car, but you still started with a screwdriver. So I left the 200,000 mile mark for the next owner. I put the E46 wheels back on, took the roof racks off, even took the stereo back out, didn't take my floor mats back out, still need those for the M3, and sold the car. To be honest, I made about 250 bucks. That's great. Anyway, the car's gone, and just like my last video, what's this?